Hello, everyone, to the Shadow Shaman. I have Justin Tang with us today. I'm very excited to have him on. Justin, you want to tell us a little bit about what you do for the audience?
Sure. And I'm really excited to be on. Thank you so much. So I specialize in religious trauma. So my help statement is I help people that have deconstructed Christianity or really any kind of, I would say, toxic religion, and they're still dealing with guilt, shame, or the fear of hell, or in particular branches of evangelicalism, rapture anxiety. And so there's a lot of religious trauma that goes on. And so that's what I specialize in. But I like to think of myself as, and this is not original, by the way, I like to think of myself as a fellow traveler on this journey. I don't really like, for me personally, I don't really like the word mentor or anything. I'm like, no, I'm just a companion or a traveler. And I'm just here to share anything that's worked for me or for people that have also traveled on the same journey as I have, and see if I can be of value, of help, create a safe space. So that's what I do.
That's such a powerful area. As someone who's been through religious trauma, that was probably the biggest hurdle of my life. Like worse than any other wound trauma I had was that one, because you get stuck in this place of you don't want to digest information that's anti-God, even if part of it makes sense. And so that there at that time I didn't know anyone to turn to help me through that. I had to figure it out. But I found out there is such a thing as like religious OCD, like that can really become a thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people suffer from it. What caused you, or what led you to do this particular area?
Yeah, great question. Well, so my background is in evangelical Christianity, and I'm in the South, so I'm in Dallas, Texas, and in Dallas, and in Texas, really, we love guns, we love steak, and we love Jesus. So like literally, this is not an exaggeration. If I go out, there's like 3 churches on every corner. It's very, very common, right? Very conservative here. So I grew up in this environment. And so really the reason why I gravitated towards this was that in doing my own work and in deconstructing Christianity, which I really love the Bible, I love Jesus, and I loved all of that, but recognizing that, oh my gosh, there's some really toxic beliefs. I think there's things in the culture that is toxic, and I've experienced my own religious trauma. So, and I know this is a burgeoning field of study, and like there are people that have experienced way worse trauma than I have, right? And it is a need out there. And so really, because religion has been such a big part of my life, is the reason why I've been drawn to this work.
It's amazing because so many people from religious backgrounds end up going through some type of an awakening. And then they don't know what to do with that, because sometimes that awakening is so seemingly in opposition to everything they've been programmed. So now they're trying to still use those filters, and there's just so much. So first, I just want to say thank you for showing up and doing this work, because this particular area, I feel like is so important. And I'll tell you real short, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. My father had an awakening, and he was deep in the Christian faith, and he ended up committing suicide because he couldn't break through. Like he kept going to the pastor and was like, I need help. Like all this stuff's happening, and I keep reading my Bible and I don't know how it all fits. And like he couldn't ground the awakening experience. And at the time, the church didn't really know how to help other than always referencing back to the Bible.
Right.
So there's been a lack of support, or people who would probably love to support, they knew how, to those who are trying to awaken or overcome religious trauma, but still, want to hold on to something about their childhood roots, or you know what I mean, or the concept of God and all of that. So powerful work. Thank you for doing it.
Yes, absolutely. And I will say that, more and more people are I guess for lack of a better word, awakening or recognizing, I would say, recognizing that there is such thing as religious trauma. And so like now therapists are being trained, coaches are being trained. There's now, funding to get like an actual, empirical study done on religious trauma. So like the news of this is growing so we can address it much better.
That's great. I love that. I have a question. What we had talked about, because you also work with people around shame and being able to accept themselves, because there's a lot of religious background where we're taught not to accept many things about ourselves. Like we have to constantly put it on the altar. We got to pray our way through it. And there's this pressure. And if you still have one of these quote shameful places or sins, then you're like the black sheep in the congregation, like, and it creates a pressure of I either have to fix it or I have to pretend that it's fixed so nobody knows that. So how does one accept something about themselves if they don't actually like it or feel like it's okay to have it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it would depend on like what that thing is. So sometimes we don't have to immediately accept it. In fact, sometimes the best thing we can do is to accept that we don't accept. And that sounds kind of interesting, right? You're like, it's like, okay, I'm acknowledging that, okay, I don't like this part about myself. And even in that, and like just admitting that can be powerful. That might be a good first step. I would say the second thing is, again, depending on what it is, we want to understand what this part of us, this behavior or this thinking pattern is actually trying to do. Because our unconscious mind, like our body, it has a certain wisdom to it, although sometimes it can act like a child. Because there's a lot of like different children in us, and I can expound on that later. But every part it's trying to do something. Like our bodies, our unconscious minds are designed to help us survive in some way. So if we've gotten hurt somewhere along the way in childhood, if there's been trauma, then we will develop some kind of ego defense, something to help us survive. Now, afterwards, as we become adults, maybe this behavior pattern or this thinking pattern it's outdated. It doesn't actually work any longer, or it's become dysfunctional. It's affecting other areas of our life. So at that point, then we want to get to that particular part of us, understand what it's trying to do. Thank you so much for trying to protect me in some way. Hey, by the way, this is outdated, but I love and accept you. Let's have a conversation. Right. And so that I think is really the essence of the work that I do. And yeah, I'll probably just end it there.
I think that was a great answer. I like the first step you put out there. I never considered sitting with being able to just say, well, actually, I don't want to accept this. Instead, for me, it was like, no, you've got to figure out how to accept it. It was like the pressure to accept it. And that in itself was so liberating to hear you say that. Cause it's like, wait, I can first go through the fact that I don't want to accept it.
Yes. And so like everything that I'm saying here is my conclusion, by the way. It's just my opinion. Also, I just want to say, like, I'm not a mental health professional, so this isn't mental health, advice or not replacement for any kind of like counseling or anything. So I just want to say that. But where was I going with this? What were we talking about? I totally forgot.
Powerful, like you saying that, it never even occurred to me that I can take that step.
Yes. And so, I want to say like everything that I'm saying is just my conclusion. And sometimes I think we create rules out of like really amazing things, like a concept like acceptance, right? A concept of a shadow work or whatever I do, even, right? Unconscious mind, conscious mind. But these are all just kind of models that are useful to a degree. But even the models that I love, that I work with, hey, I'm biased. Maybe by attaching to one model, I've actually limited myself, right? And so even with like acceptance, it's like, oh, we don't have to accept. It's okay. So yeah, that's what I want to say.
I have another question following on that. What do you think could be the quote, I don't want to know if the word damage is the right word, but how could it be hurting me or somebody for us to not accept something about ourselves?
Sure. Yeah, so let me use a personal example, and then I'll use a more general example.
Okay.
So I, as a good Christian, as an evangelical, I loved defending the faith. And so there's a branch of theology called apologetics. And that simply means to give a rational defense. So I didn't realize exactly what was going on in my unconscious, or at least like not fully, right? As we're all growing. And so I studied apologetics and philosophy and theology. And what I was doing was a kind of overcompensating, right? And I was trying to intellectualize everything because that means I don't have to feel what's going on really. That's a defense. And so what also ended up happening was I felt very self-righteous. I felt like I know it all. I have the right Sunday school answers. And this gave me a sense of superiority, of pride. I couldn't relate to people, right? Even within the church and outside of the church. And so I was either intentionally or unintentionally pushing people away or hurting them, right? With my self-righteousness or pride. So that's like maybe like a personal example. A more general example. So let's say somebody is not accepting, maybe they're homosexual, but they've been taught that this is wrong or they've been shamed in some way. And so they reject this part of themselves, they repress it. And oftentimes what can happen is now we've locked this part away, but now I'm seeing other people, other homosexual people. Well, because I hate that part of myself that, I'm homosexual, perhaps now I'm being an outspoken homophobe, being outspoken and actually speaking out against homosexuality. When in reality, I haven't actually looked at that part of me, right, and accepted it. And so now you're actually like, the right word is not projection, it's displacing this hate onto other people. So yeah, like that's just another example of like how we can
Like that word
affect other people.
C.S. Lewis wrote a book about Christian apologetics. I love C.S. Lewis.
No, I think C.S. Lewis was a great writer for sure.
He was a great writer. He wrote another book that was like, gosh, what is it called? The Screw Tape Letters. And it was about the perspective of if you were like, quote, the demon that was trying to get into the Christian's head. But some of the arguments, some of the things he brought up was actually really, there was some gold nuggets there that was powerful. And I was like, wait a minute, like even if you take the demon, the character out and put it the mind, it was still some powerful stuff. But I related to you in the sense that I did mission work when I was younger because I was really encouraged. So I took my Bible to school and I was very similar, quoted scripture, had answers, went on mission trips out of not knowing any better. Like that's just, and I was very adamant, like, but you're going to go to hell if you don't do this and da 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 da,
Right.
And not knowing that because it was so encouraged, and then the church also really encouraged like, oh, if it's an R-rated movie, you should get up and say you can't watch it, walk out, you can't hang out with friends like that. And so it did create a inner complexity because I did have such a curiosity for this stuff. So it's like, so I totally relate to that, by the way. What are signs that someone is overcompensating or undercompensating for something that they're not accepting, and maybe they're not aware that they're not accepting this part of themselves?
Yeah. I want to go back to my personal example. I think
yeah.
that's good. So and I'll just be vulnerable here. One of my deepest fears is being dumb. And that probably comes from, my brother was just very smart, very well read, and didn't like people who were dumb. And I felt like I was dumb, like, oh God, I'm so dumb compared to this guy. And so that has probably been a very big and unconscious driver to read all this stuff, to like, even now, like I don't want to be dumb on this podcast. Like I do not want to be dumb, right? Like I want to know, I want to
Right.
say all the right answers here. So that's like one thing, right? Like I would like try to read all these books and study theology and philosophy and things like that. And part of it was, hey, if I do these things, if I intellectualize it, I don't have to feel. That's part of it. The other part was I really did not want to be dumb. The other part is, hey, I actually had a genuine interest in these things. But there was that unconscious driver to overcompensate because I felt like, oh, I'm dumb. I need to study these things, right? So that's just something for me to be aware about and like just stop and do some self-inquiry. So another thing about overcompensating, let me, any type of control is going to be overcompensating. So, actually, here's another example that comes to mind. Apparently, there's something called Napoleon's complex. I never heard of this, but apparently Napoleon was a very short guy. I'm short, by the way, also. So, for example, if I felt, shamed about being short and I felt weak, we might overcompensate by going to the gym and being obsessed with going to the gym and doing martial arts or learning, I don't know, how to shoot people or something like that. I think The Body Keeps the Score, that book by Bessel van Kolk. I can't remember his name.
I'll write that title down. I haven't heard of it.
But in his book, the Body Keeps the Score, he talks about a really tragic event. Right, so this actually deals with the religious trauma. Ironically enough, as I think about this, it's this person as a child was molested by a priest, and locked that part away. Right, just as we do as children, like there's ego defenses for a reason. It's trying to protect us from something. But as time went on, going into college, becoming an adult, this person became like jacked. Like I think it was like a football player or something like that, or something like a gym rat. By any stretch of like outward appearance, we would probably be very intimidated. Like, oh, this guy has it all together. This guy is jacked. Like he is disciplined. But the original trauma was never addressed, and so inside, still having these PTSD symptoms every once in a while, right? But inside, feeling like he's still this hurt kid because it hasn't been addressed. And so like there's like that overcompensation there. When it comes to like undercompensation, I would say there's any kind of escape, partying, going to drugs, alcohol, sex, anything like that. That's going to be the opposite of control, right? Like a lack of control, trying to escape. I would say that goes in the category of undercompensation.
I have a question. So I run into this a lot with my own family and even clients, potential clients, that they have such an interest in some of the things I've said or expressed, and they want help. But it's like they have this deep fear, which I relate to because I used to have it hardcore, this fear that, well, maybe this is something that's not godly leading me away. And then they'll keep coming back to me though, because they'll push it away because they're like, but I need to go to the Bible for this answer. And then they'll come back, and it's like they're scared because it comes back to this fear base of, but what if this is actually something of Satan pulling me away? And then they can't seem to break out of that stronghold. Even though sometimes there certain things don't make sense to them anymore. What's your advice on actually facing some of the fear of being lured away? That seems to be a fear, or a fear of displeasing God in some way, and there's some punishment.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would definitely want to ask some questions and learn more about specifically what are they dealing with.
Fair enough.
But how, can you ask the question again? How do we?
Yeah, like gosh, I don't want to use my family member in case they watch, because I don't know if that's appropriate, if they'd be happy with that. But Susan, we're just going to call out someone named Susan. Okay.
Right.
Is very interested in transcending and healing certain wounds and mind aspects that she has, that the church and the Bible don't fully bring her all the way there, the closure of doing that. But there's a fear that going outside of the church for that help might actually be something of Satan trying to lure them away from God.
Yeah. I think in that example, getting some education on, there are Christian groups out there who I think do good healing work from a Christian perspective. Now, I still disagree with their conclusions, and I still feel like there's limitations on that. But say getting educated, like, hey, look, there are Christian groups who love Jesus, who love the Bible, right? And they are doing a type of shadow work. They are doing a kind of regression to cause, and a parts work and inner child stuff. So starting with that, but really I would want to ask, like, yeah, what are you really afraid is going to happen? And what are you hoping to get from going to a Leslie, listening to the Shadow Shaman podcast and, booking a session? Like, what are you hoping to get? And are you actually getting that right now? What's at stake here? What's really at stake here? Would God want you to be stuck in this fear? Maybe not.
Yeah, right. There's a quote. I'm gonna share this quote. It's one of my favorite quotes, and it says that I can no more understand the complexities of God than the pancake I made for breakfast understands me. And I always found that so liberating, because in the church, I was always not defending myself to the church as much as my own personal family. That, well, what if God wants to teach me in a different way, in mysterious ways? Because there was like a Bible verse that talked about how he can work in mysterious ways, because I was struggling to fit the mold. And it created shame of, I must be disconnected from that which created me. It forsaken me. It doesn't love me because it made me different. And I'm struggling to fit in. So something's wrong with me. And so that became the lie that I told myself. So then when I would go to church, I didn't feel safe in an area that should feel safe, because it felt like, oh, but, I'm not God's child here, apparently, according to this, and that. Yet I was still having all these beautiful experiences, that in the depths of my heart, I'm like, but you are loved by that which created you. Even if you don't understand it, you feel it on some innate level, regardless of what's being taught to you. So that was like, this area in itself. I have so many people that might find working with you such a breakthrough, because I've had a lot of misconceptions that shadow work is some type of witchy woo-woo or spiritual thing. And I've always said, I feel like it's a lot more psychological science than any type of spiritual woo-woo.
Yes. And like, as you were talking, it just made me like realize, oh, like, of course, like, you were able to frame it in a different way, right? Because the frame is saying, no, this is Satan. But a different frame is like, well, how do we know that? What if it was God?
Yeah.
What if it was, right? What makes us think that it is Satan, right? Especially like, you shall know them by their fruits. Yeah. Well, you're producing such great fruit, such great healing, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. So like, that's what I want to say.
And I have a question. How would you decipher, I don't know if this is like a fair question, but for the audience, what do you notice would be the difference between someone who's struggling with religious trauma and someone who's actually developed like religious OCD?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I would say that OCD is probably a symptom of trauma.
Okay.
Right. There's some kind of magical thinking going on, right? I bet if we were to dig deeper, there's an ego state apart, right? That has that magical thinking that we can have a conversation with and we can love and accept. But yeah, I think OCD is just a symptom.
Okay. I'm just wondering because like I went through a stage where it's like I had to repent multiple times a day because there was a fear that like, what if I sinned and I didn't realize I sinned and I forget to repent and then I die and I go to hell. And I'm a kid. I'm like 10 years old. And I'm so scared of upsetting God that I'm repenting multiple times a day out of fear that I sinned. And it was like compulsive. It was living in a constant fear as a child. And now when I repeat it to my parents, they're like, that doesn't make any sense. It's not even rational. But I was a child already under trauma from losing my dad, under these psycho breakdown, religious awakening stuff. The frame of that was already so spiritual and religious. So I lose my father. And then now while I'm under trauma, I'm developing this religious OCD. And so I explained to my family, when you're under trauma like that, it doesn't have to be rational. Like now I'm like, that's the craziest thing. Why would you do that? But at the time that was reality. That was like my boxed in, and I suffered. And and I think what people struggle with the most is they're suffering and then they don't even know how to vocalize the intensity and extent of that suffering, to where sometimes we're surrounded by people who don't actually see the emergency. I'm going to say it that way, the red flags of how big the situation is. So what would, in your opinion, and I know that you said earlier, this is not to take the place of like actual medical or therapy help, but what, as a parent, what is a sign that our children could be suffering from some type of religious trauma?
That is a great question. Let me just preface it. I'm not a parent. I have no kids.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. If there's I might actually have to defer to you on this one because I'm not a parent and I don't work with kids, so I probably am not going to say the right answer. But my guess is
frame it to that we're just big children. So like you could, what's some of the signs of your adult patient that a child might mimic? That might be easier to say it that way.
Yeah, like any kind of chronic shame.
Okay.
Chronic, like internalized shame, like this kind of shame is not healthy, right? It's like all pervasive. It is it just becomes this particular like an identity, like there's just something just horribly wrong with me, which leads to like self-loathing, right? Self-sabotage, feelings of worthlessness, so, or like any kind of like neurotic guilt, obsessive guilt, obviously the fear of hell is a big one, right? And I think, so like not being able to connect with other people, having this black and white thinking, which a child does have, right? Because they're a child, but like now it's, going into adulthood, this black and white thinking, it's not actually rational. So I would say like any signs of, because the unconscious mind is not rational,
right?
It has a particular logic to it, right? But it is not rational. And so any kind of like childish thinking, irrational thinking, is a sign of trauma. It's a sign of a defense. And the problem, I think, when we try to reason out of trauma, we try to logic out of trauma, it doesn't work because we're speaking the wrong language. The language of the unconscious mind is metaphor, archetypes, feeling, right, stories, the language of imagination. So like when we do inner child work, whether or not the inner child actually exists or it's just a metaphor, I have no idea. That's an interesting philosophical discussion.
Right.
But the point of the matter is like inner child works, and it's a metaphor, and it is a metaphor as well. And that's like how we're talking to the unconscious mind. It's not a logical thing. It's a very right brain type of activity. It's a very relational type of activity too. So yeah, I don't even remember the original. I guess the original question was, what are some of the signs?
Yeah.
But yeah, I would mention all of those things. Um, any type of irrational type kind of thinking, right?
I have another question. What would your advice be on? There's been a lot of people who've quote left the church, and then they deal with like a community shame, like where the community is like, oh, this person has fallen. They've, and they suddenly feel isolated because they don't have
Yeah.
that community anymore. And sometimes they feel shame around that of feeling like they disappointed everybody by going off in this path and now they feel alone. What would your advice be to someone who might be in that area right now where they feel like they haven't found a new tribe, but they've moved away from the church but they're still here and alone?
Right. Right. Well, first of all, like I'm very sorry that like you're going through that. And it's normal to feel that way. Like if you've been rejected from a community, yeah, like there's going to be some deep pain with that. And just know that you're not alone, right? There are people that have been, excommunicated from the church, or they've been rejected by their community, and they have found like new communities or new tribes. And there are even like online communities of people who have experienced religious trauma, or they've deconstructed Christianity. And so there's, at the very least, hopefully online support with that. So I would say just to encourage them, like you're not alone, and it does get better, and it's okay to feel that way. And in fact, like there's gold in that pain. Um, when you get to like heal and recover, and like there's new life. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I was kind of thinking what came to mind is like, I remember going through that. I remember going through the stage, but it wasn't so much the people. I was okay with that because I was always a loner introvert. But for me, what I found is that religion does give children a set of structure. And so when I broke up with the church, which is, I say it that way, but every now and then I actually go to church just to, every great once in a while I'm like, I'm gonna go to church just to re-expose myself. And each time I see just how far I came from the girl that was so terrified of like forgetting to repent, right? And so something about that is comforting every now and then to go in. But one of the things I notice is when you do break up with the church, however you want to call it, you suddenly realize you've let go of a structure that has been part of your like childhood, and now suddenly you realize there is no structure, and it's freeing and terrifying at the same time.
Yeah.
So that was like my whole 20s. I'm 33, but from like 20 to like 27 was nothing but discovery and not having that structure. And it was the most scariest thing I've ever put myself through. And I still pray. I'm still someone who prays because that's like the one consistent comfort, because I'd be like, I don't know what's happening here. And I'm reading this philosophy book that I was never allowed to read. And I'm listening to Joan Jett and I was never allowed to do that. And then now I got to pray because I'm like, this is all new. And there's still part of Leslie that wanted some type of structure because that made her feel safe, while I figured out how to rebuild something to work off of. And so probably one of the hardest things I had to learn after that shift was I used to use God as a way to feel safe.
Right.
Use God and the teachings of the church to feel safe. So Leslie had to learn how to be safe again within herself without the religious teachings. And that was a challenge on its own.
Yeah.
So I do feel like I encourage anyone out there who's going through some type of religious trauma or shame, not only to reach out to somebody, but to I wish, looking back, I wish I would have had a mentor or a friend to go through that time of discovery, just because there was times I didn't know if I was going to make it through. because that ego kept wanting to default me back to these religious teachings, like, oh, something bad happened, it's because you've been straying away from God, you're being punished. And always came back to this punishment cycle, right? And
Right.
there was no way to escape that while I kept feeding my ego. It felt like my higher part of me is like, this doesn't make sense, we're working against it, my ego. And so it was like, oh, but this is the way it is. And there was internal clash for years. So I really encourage anybody out there who struggles with that to get a community, to reach out to Justin, reach out to somebody, because that's the only thing I would have, quote, changed back then, is allowing myself to find some type of support.
Yes.
You know, I feel like support and community is powerful, even if it's not in a church setting anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely agree. And that's like the one thing I think church really gets right, is that there's this community, right? And shared values and all of that. You know, I had to go through, I had my own work, and I had a coach and a therapist during that time. And I was just like, just processing like so much stuff, so much unconscious things. And I really needed that. So yeah, absolutely. Like, don't be afraid to reach out.
We got about 15 more minutes. Justin, I want to hear a little bit about Justin when he's not working.
Oh,
Justin outside of
oh
work.
God. That's what I'm also trying to discover here. It's like, I love like what we're talking about, right? But yeah, who am I outside of this? That's I'm still discovering. I'm getting into stand-up a little bit.
Oh, nice.
I've done it for the first time like a couple of weeks ago, but I've just been that particular day hasn't been the greatest, but I will go again. But yeah, like, I think I'm just very interested in people. I'm very interested in I am interested in comedy. I'm interested in I'm still interested in religion, like heavily, right? Super. So I guess, like, honestly, I feel like I'm kind of boring. So like, I still read stuff on like the Bible and spirituality and things like that. But yeah, I feel like I was more interesting back in the day. Right now, I'm just like, because I used to play guitar, I used to play table tennis, I used to do martial arts, and I feel like I just quit all that.
Really?
There was a time and place. I might pick it up again. You know, I still love music. I still love the guitar. I just haven't like played it, you know.
No, you sound exciting. I read a lot.
Yeah.
Too. I still have
Yeah.
a Bible in my home too. Because that was still a huge part of my life. And now where I'm at in my life, I can go back and read the Bible, and it's like multidimensional now to me. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I know what this is saying now from where I'm at. And I'm like, oh, this ancient text also supports. And so I even look at the Bible differently than I used to. So I think that's just a comfort thing. But I'm like you, I read a lot. I don't feel like I'm as interesting as I was. Same.
Really?
But I still feel interesting. Like, I feel like you're interesting.
Yeah.
And it's so, and I'm not trying to like trauma bond here in some way, but you mentioned the fear of being dumb. I have the same fear of being intellectually not able to understand something. It's not even that I have to be right. It's like I have to understand it somehow. Yeah. And if I feel like I don't, and that I think is from everybody else seemingly having all the answers when I was a kid, and they seem so okay with everything and so understanding, and I'm over here like, this doesn't work and this doesn't make sense. So then I thought, oh, I'm not able to grasp it. And then now I'm like, no, you were just like awakening at a very young age and realizing there was more for you than that. But we share a lot of that stuff in common. So
yes. You know, the Bible says that there's no temptation that has seized us except that which is common to man, something like that. And I now reinterpret that, right? Like, it's like, yeah, like, we're all human and we deal with similar problems. It's called being human, right? Like, like we all have the same, generally speaking, like, have the same type of fears and insecurities and all these different things. So yeah.
one more question.
Sure.
When most of your clients, what is it that they typically are looking for? What's one of the things they seem to desire the most?
Yeah, so really it's like self-acceptance, which is so fascinating because it's like that's what I want as well. And I think that's mainly what everyone wants. I think it's a self-acceptance. Obviously, the fear of hell is big, and if that's, affecting your life, that's crippling you, to have that kind of peace, right? To have a nice normal life. But I think really to go off on the self-acceptance thing, it's really discovering and exploring, who they really are.
It just sounds
And being okay
liberating.
with it. Yeah. Yeah.
It's the liberating part of that. And yeah, and being willing to be that trailblazer. And because it takes courage. I think it takes courage to do that, especially if you're not supported by family or friends, or you don't have somebody cheering you on that path. It takes courage to do that, but it's rewarding. It's liberating.
It is. And I'm so glad like that you have this podcast, and it really has been a source of wisdom and inspiration. And like I will continue to listen to the Shadow Shaman podcast. And I'm really grateful for like the shadow work community.
Yeah.
And that's been big. It's been good.
Thank you. How can people find you?
Yeah, I am fairly active on Facebook. I think my Facebook, I'm gonna try, I had to double check my Facebook handle now. I think it's justin.trance.tang. So if you can reach me on Facebook, that's good. My website is www.redeemyourreality.com. And so from there, if you want, you can book a discovery call with me. Those are probably the best ways. I can also give you the email, redeemyourreality@gmail.com. That's also another way to reach me, but like the best way is probably Facebook.
I definitely want to recommend you to people because for two things. Not only did I see that you have a ton of awesome feedback, like people love you. I was reading the test.
Oh, great.
I was like,
yeah.
like Justin's got it going. He's got a good skill set. He's got that good presence of love and acceptance because people are very happy with the results. I saw that. But two, I think that if you've dealt with religious trauma, you are going to feel so much more safer and comfortable coming to someone who has a background that in Christianity to relate to you versus going to a counselor or a mentor or teacher or someone to help them who's got no background, because then they don't actually understand the type of fears and enough about the religion to actually be a source of help. So what I like is that you have a background in this area. It makes you fit for this area to help people. So I already have people in mind. I'm like, I got to connect them to Justin because
great.
It's like when people are too close to you, like to me, they're just like, it's Leslie, like it's not the same weight, but when it comes from someone else, it's suddenly like they feel safer about it because I've already explored myself way out there that sometimes people get nervous. They're like, I don't know what she's into right now. So like, but yeah, thank you so much for coming on here, Justin.
Thank you, Leslie. This is really great. Thank you.
All right, guys, thank you for joining the Shadow Shaman. I will be posting this with links so you can get a hold of Justin. All right.